Hey there, survivors. If you can hear me, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and where you're listening from, I'm glad you made it. Now, get comfortable. This is your next story.
I wake up when the room gets cold enough that the water bottle beside my bunk has a skin of ice under the cap. That tells me two things before I even sit up. The generator either coughed out during the night or the wind shifted and started pushing through the north seam again. I keep my sleeping bag around my shoulders, reach for the flashlight hanging from a zip tie over the bunk, and check the time on my watch. 6:18 in the morning. No alarm. The little battery clock on the shelf is dead. The room smells like damp canvas, old diesel, and steel dust. Same as every morning out here. Same as the day before. Same as the day before that. I sit on the edge of the bunk, pull on my insulated pants, and listen before I open the door. If a machine is running outside, I need to know which one. If someone is shouting, I need that first too. All I hear is wind grinding hard snow across sheet metal. The prefab sleeps 4, but only 2 bunks are in use now. Mine by the heater wall, Ingrid's by the door. Her blanket is still rolled tight. She is already up. Good. I pull on my boots without unlacing them all the way, shrug into my insulated jacket, and step into the narrow hall. The heater is on, but weak. That means the generator did not die. It means one of the vents probably iced over again. I open the outer door and get hit with a flat wall of cold that strips any lazy thought out of my head. The yard outside the prefab is white, hard, and mostly level with drift. The service block, the machine shed, the fuel berm, and the old mast are all there, but the edges are getting buried again. If we stop moving snow for 2 days, the site starts disappearing. Torben is already at the generator housing with the side panel open and a hand lamp clipped to the frame. He does not look up when I walk over. He points at the exhaust elbow with a screwdriver and says, "Ice again." His beard has a layer of white frozen into it, and his eyelashes are clumped on one side where the wind is hitting him. I crouch, check the pipe, and see it right away. The outer bend is choked with frozen condensation and soot. Not full blockage, but close enough to cut the draft. I take the scraper off the housing bracket and chip the ice out while he keeps the lamp steady. The engine note changes within seconds. Cleaner, stronger. He gives one nod and shuts the panel. That is most of our mornings. Something sticks. Something ices. Something leaks. We fix it before coffee if we can. If we do not, the cold starts making decisions for us. My name is Anika Sorensen. I am a structural welder. I took a contract in Greenland after 2 rough years of chasing marine repair work up and down the East Coast. The money was better here. The terms were bad, the site was remote, and the weather made every routine job harder than it had to be. But the pay hit my account on time. That mattered. The old utility site where we are working used to support a relay system farther inland. Now it is mostly dead infrastructure waiting for salvage crews and accountants to agree on what is worth hauling out. Our part is simple on paper: inspect steel, reinforce what might fail before spring, tag what needs cutting later, keep the access routes usable, and do not leave the place in worse shape than we found it. On paper, it is clean work. On the ground, every task takes twice as long once the wind gets involved. The crew is small. Dale Mercer runs the contract and carries too many lists for a man working in a place where weather can cancel the whole day before breakfast. He used to work oil support and talks like every job has a clean line between management and labor, even when everybody here is hauling snow and freezing together. Ingrid handles electrical tagging, inventories, and most of the paperwork nobody else wants. Yusuf is the only one out here who can keep old equipment alive with half a toolkit and bad light. Petru cuts corners when he thinks nobody is looking and always wants to leave early. Torben is local, hired through transport logistics, and knows what this coast does when the forecast says manageable. He is usually right before anyone admits it. I work steel. If something needs plating, bracing, patching, cutting, anchoring, or dragging into line, it usually ends up on my list. By 7, I am on the north side platform with my hood up, gloves on, and the grinder throwing a stream of sparks into the snow below. The support plate at the mast base has lamination rust along the edge and one anchor point that failed years ago, then got ignored until the whole joint started walking during freeze-thaw cycles. I clean the surface, check thickness with the gauge, and mark out a new patch while the wind keeps trying to pull the chalk from my hand. Dale wants 3 repairs done before the supply plane lands. I tell him he is getting 2 if the torch lines behave. He tells me the plane has mail, sealant, filters, and fresh food. I tell him good. Then I go back to work. Around here, nobody wastes time pretending morale fixes corroded steel. The first sign that the day is going bad is not dramatic. It is quiet. The radio in the service block is always spitting something out during working hours. Harbor traffic, weather corrections, pilots checking strips, somebody asking for a relay, somebody swearing over static. That morning it goes thin, long patches of hiss, then a burst, then silence again. I notice it when I come inside to swap gloves and heat my fingers over the unit heater in the corridor. Ingrid is by the table with headphones on, frowning at a notepad full of half-written call signs. She pulls one ear cup off and asks if I know whether the settlement south of us changed frequencies. I tell her no. She says she got a clipped call from a fish plant office, then nothing. Then a Danish emergency bulletin so distorted she could only pull out medical, contact, and suspend. Dale hears that and comes in from outside fast enough to leave the door open behind him. He makes Ingrid play the recording back even though it barely counts as one. It is mostly static with words shoved through it. Petru leans on the doorway eating from a pack of crackers and says, "This is what happens every winter when some office clerk hears the flu numbers and decides the whole coast is under quarantine." Torben tells him to shut up and listen. Nobody speaks after that. The room goes quiet except for the radio hiss and the heater fan clicking on and off. Dale tries the harbour office. No answer. He tries the regional transport channel. No answer there either. Then, a pilot farther north comes through clear for 6 seconds and says one sentence before the signal breaks apart. "Do not take passengers showing fever and confusion." Dale writes it down. Petru laughs once and says people lose their minds every cold season. Ingrid turns and looks at him in a way that makes him stop. We keep working. That is what happens on contract jobs when the news is vague and the sky is clear. Nobody wants to be the first person standing around with gloves off, acting scared over half a radio call. I finish fitting the first plate, tack it in 4 corners, and start welding along the upper seam. Yusuf takes the loader over to the machine shed and starts moving fuel drums out from the drift line before they freeze in place any deeper. Torben clears the strip markers. Dale does 3 laps between the radio room and the yard without helping anybody. The supply plane is supposed to land a little after 11. By noon it has not shown. By 1, Dale is outside staring south so often that Petru starts making comments about management vision. Then we hear the engine. The plane comes in low and rough. It does not make a clean pass first. It drops straight toward the strip, touches harder than usual, and throws a tail of powder past the marker poles. I walk out from the platform with my hood pushed back and my gloves still on. Dale is already halfway to the landing area, waving one arm. The plane rolls long, turns late, and stops at an angle with one ski off the packed center line. The side cargo door opens before the pilot door. A man in the back is on his knees in the cargo space, holding the frame with one hand. He is not unloading. He is not speaking. He is staring out at us with his head tilted slightly down, and he stays that way even when the pilot climbs out and starts shouting for distance. We stop where the packed strip ends. The pilot has no hat on, no patience left, and a face that looks older than it did the last time he dropped cargo here. He says he is not taking signatures up close, and he is not staying. 1 crate only, filters, dry goods, 2 mailbags. No passengers outbound, no passengers inbound. Dale asks what happened to the rest of the load. The pilot says half the coast is locking down airstrips, and he is flying on fuel and bad information. Then he jerks a thumb at the man in the door and says one of the deck crew got sick after the previous stop. Fever first. Then he stopped answering straight. Then he tried to open the hatch in the air. Nobody moves closer after that. Petru mutters that the man is probably delirious. The pilot hears him and snaps, Then keep him away from me and away from yourselves. We get the crate on a sled, drag it clear, and the plane is moving again before the cargo door finishes closing. Nobody says much after the plane leaves. The site feels smaller, not from anything physical, more from what is now hanging over every routine task. A fever on a plane is not the problem. A crewman trying to open a hatch in flight is the problem. Dale pulls everybody into the service block and has Ingrid inventory medical supplies while he keeps cycling through frequencies looking for something clean. The radio gives us scraps. One bulletin says limit contact. Another says wait for transport instructions. A third sounds calmer, which makes it worse. Petru gets annoyed first. He says he is not sitting in a dead relay shed, waiting for some office to explain a bad flu season to him. Torben asks how far he thinks he is riding alone in this weather if transport shuts down. Petru says, farther than here. Dale tells everybody to keep working while he tries to confirm the next pickup. By late afternoon, the temperature has dropped another notch, and the sky over the bay has gone flat and pale. I am in the machine shed cutting steel tabs for a corridor brace when Yusuf walks in carrying a fuel separator bowl in one hand and says Petru threw up behind the berm. I set the torch down, close the valve, and ask whether Petru ate something bad. Yusuf shrugs and says Petru called him by Dale's name, and then by a name nobody here has. That gets my attention. I find Petru in the prefab washroom, with both hands on the sink and his forehead against the metal cabinet. He turns when I open the door and stares at me too long before he speaks. Then he asks why I am late with the hose fittings. I am not handling hose fittings. I have not touched hose fittings all week. I tell him to sit down. He does not move. He blinks once, looks past me into the hall, and asks whether the plane is back already. Dale sees him like that, and stops pretending we have time to wait this out. He orders Petru into the far bunk room and tells everyone else to keep clear. Ingrid brings the field med case. The thermometer shows a fever high enough that she checks it twice, then a third time. Petru knocks the cup of water out of her hand when she tries to give him tablets. 5 minutes later, he is asking for water again and acting like she never came in. He starts talking in bursts, then loses track halfway through each sentence. At one point, he asks whether his sister made the crossing. At another, he tells Dale the pipes under the mast are moving. There are no pipes under the mast. Dale locks the room from outside and slides a heavy tool chest in front of the door after Petru begins hitting it with his shoulder. The banging goes on long enough that it becomes part of the building noise. Nobody eats much at dinner. Ingrid keeps marking supplies on a pad with a pencil that keeps breaking at the tip. Yusuf drains the med cabinet onto the table and lays it out in lines. There is not much there once you separate the packaging from the useful part. Antibiotics, pain tablets, burn dressings, saline, gloves, tape, a few expired line kits. Nothing for a real hospital problem. Nothing for a fever that flips a man upside down in one afternoon. Dale gets through to the coast station after dark. I can hear the voice on the other end, but not all the words. Weather closing, 1 helicopter possible, weight restrictions, no guarantee of return trip. Dale says yes to everything before the man finishes the sentence. Then he hangs up and tells us to pack survival bags and strip the site to essentials before first light. The rest of the night goes into bags, boxes, fuel checks, and arguments over what counts as essential when aircraft weight decides for us. I pull spare gloves, socks, ration packs, a hand lamp, batteries, my tool roll, and 2 changes of base layers into one duffel. Ingrid takes radio notes, med supplies, and document packets. Yusuf loads filters, belts, and 1 case of parts he says he can trade anywhere if transport fails farther south. Torben hauls packed crates to the service block entry and stacks them in wind order so the first out is the first loaded. Dale keeps going back to the radio room, then coming out with a new list every time. The banging from Petru's room stops sometime after midnight. Nobody comments on it. We all hear the silence. At dawn, I open the outer service door and get hit by air so cold it tightens every seam in my clothes. The strip is still visible. That is the only good sign. The helicopter arrives near noon with the weather already lowering behind it. It does not land smoothly. It settles hard, blades chopping loose snow into a white wall around the skids. The side door opens and the pilot starts pointing at cargo before the engine even settles to idle. We move fast. Ingrid goes first with the med bag. Torben passes the ration crate in under the bench. Dale shoves packets and manifests after her. I am dragging Yusuf's spare part case toward the door when the bunk room behind the prefab row slams open. Petru comes out barefoot into the snow. His trouser leg is half torn from the knee down. One hand is bleeding where he must have ripped it on the latch or panel edge. He is moving in a straight line, not shouting, not asking for help, not looking at any of us the way a man normally does when he sees people and machines and open space. Yusuf turns toward him without thinking and raises one hand. Torben steps in from the other side with a snow shovel and tries to block Petru off from the helicopter. Petru hits him hard enough to fold them both into the cargo pallet. Dale yells for everybody to back off. The pilot is screaming now, one hand on the doorframe, one arm waving people in. Yusuf lunges to pull Torben clear, and his boot hooks under the loader sling hanging from the mast frame. The loose chain twists. He goes down sideways against the wheel assembly, and the hydraulic arm drops the last few inches it had been creeping all morning. I hear the impact through the rotor noise. After that, the whole yard breaks into pieces. Torben is on his knees trying to get up. Petru is on him again, driving forward without balance, slipping and forcing forward again. Ingrid is halfway inside the helicopter with both hands locked on the medbag. Dale grabs my shoulder and tells me to move. I look down and see Yusuf pinned at the lower leg under the loader arm. He is awake. He is trying to pull free and getting nowhere. I tell Dale to get the jack blocks. He does not move. He looks at the sky. He looks at the helicopter. Then he tells me the pilot cannot wait. I tell him fine. Then I drop to the loader frame and start stripping chain by hand. He stands there 1 second longer, then climbs into the helicopter. Torben gets shoved in after him by the pilot. The door slams. Snow blasts over me so hard I lose sight of the yard. When it clears, the helicopter is already lifting. I stay crouched by the wheel frame with snow blowing under my hood until the aircraft turns south and disappears into the weather. Then I get to work. Yusuf is conscious, talking in short bursts, trying to tell me how to set the bottle jack and where the cribbing blocks are stored. I already know. I run to the machine shed, drag out the jack, 2 hardwood blocks, and a chain length with hooks on both ends, then fight the wind all the way back. The loader arm has settled onto his lower leg at a bad angle. I set the jack under the frame, not the arm, build cribbing under the side point, tension the chain to stop a slip, and start lifting 1 notch at a time. Nothing about it is quick. Snow fills the ratchet teeth. My gloves lose grip. Twice I have to stop and scrape ice off the handle before it will seat again. Yusuf stays with me for the first part. Then he goes quiet. Then he comes back and asks if the helicopter circled. I tell him no, and keep pumping the jack. When the arm finally rises enough, I drag him clear by the shoulders and pull him onto a cargo sled. His lower leg is bent where it should not be, and the fabric around the boot is already darkening. I do not waste time looking too long. I splint what I can with flat bar, rags, tape, and a cut section of foam board from the insulation stack. I wrap it tight, then tighter when the bleeding shows through. After that, I get him inside the service block 1 stop at a time. The sled catches on every drift ridge and old frozen rut between the strip and the entry. By the time I haul him into the main corridor, the sky has dropped so low the mast top is gone in cloud. No second flight is coming in that. I know it the second I see it. I do not stand there thinking about it. I bolt the outer door, start the generator, and strip the inner maintenance room for anything that can hold heat. Yusuf drifts in and out while I move mattresses, tool lockers, insulation rolls, and water jugs into the deeper room with the least exterior wall exposure. It used to be a service chamber for cable splices. Concrete lower walls, steel upper framing, 1 corridor door, 1 chase door, no windows except a narrow service pane up high that I can cover. Better than the prefab, better than the radio room. I hang insulation blankets from conduit brackets to cut the airspace down, patch a wall penetration with steel plate and sealant, and get the small diesel heater open on the floor. The unit is old but not dead. The fuel line is cracked at the coupling, and the exhaust flange is loose. I swap the line section from spare stock, tighten the flange, reroute the exhaust into the service shaft, and build a baffle box from a ruined duct segment so the outlet is hidden behind broken concrete and drift outside. It is not invisible, Nothing with heat is invisible in weather like this. It is better than a straight pipe throwing a clean marker into the air. By the time the heater catches and starts pushing steady warmth into the room, the light outside is almost gone. Yusuf asks for water. I give him small amounts and check the wrap again. More seepage, more swelling. The medkit is spread open on the floor beside him, and it looks thin already. Tablets, dressings, tape, saline. No field surgery kit worth trusting, no spare hands, no clean transport route. I stack food tins under the spare mattress so they do not freeze solid, melt drift ice in 2 pots on the heater casing, and write the first fuel numbers on a piece of cardboard torn from a ration carton. Generator level, heater can, stove fuel, battery count. If I do not start tracking that now, I will lose something I need and not notice until it is gone. The first hit on the chase door comes after dark. Not loud. Metal on metal, slow and uneven. I freeze where I am with the lamp in one hand and listen. The sound comes again. Then a scraping push low against the frame. Yusuf lifts his head off the mattress and looks at the corridor. I cut the main lamp, set the handlight on the floor aimed away from me, and move to the door with a pry bar. The old cable chase should be sealed at the far end. It was welded years before we got here. The handle turns once, stops against the bar I dropped through the brackets an hour earlier. Then something hits the lower vent panel beside the frame from the other side. Frost spills off the seam onto the floor. A hand forces into the gap first, cut up and blackened at the fingertips, then pulls back and drives in again harder. The shoulder behind it keeps pushing without any effort to shield itself from the metal edge. I bring the pry bar down on the hand. It jerks back. I shove a folded welding blanket into the opening, tip a 2-wheel cart over against the panel, run chain through the frame, and haul the binder tight until the cart groans against the floor. The movement behind the panel keeps coming in short pushes for almost a minute. Then it stops. When I turn around, Yusuf is pushing himself up on one elbow, staring at the corridor through the blanket gap. I give him water and tell him the chase side is secure for now. He nods once and tells me not to open anything if Petru starts talking normal. I say all right. That is the first time either of us says Petru's name since the yard. After that, I move the rest of the supplies into the inner room, reinforce the entry with a steel shelving frame bolted across the approach, hang canvas behind it to slow drafts, and rig noise alarms from wire and loose hardware on both doors. Near midnight, the radio spits one clear burst out of nowhere. A woman's voice says all remote personnel are to shelter in place and avoid direct contact with symptomatic persons. Then the signal breaks into static and dies. I do not waste battery trying to call back. I shut it off, add another line to the fuel card, and keep working until the room looks less like a workshop and more like a place one person might be able to hold. I sleep for maybe 20 minutes, sitting against the wall with my boots still on. When I wake, the outer steps are almost level with the drift and the service block feels quieter in a bad way, packed in by weather and snow. Yusuf is alive, but the fever has moved deeper into him. He asks once whether Dale came back for the rest of us. Later he asks whether the mast lights are on. The mast has not had lights in years. I cut more ice from the lee side of the entry berm, melt it, dry socks over the heater guard, drain water out of the generator separator, and start making the place smaller again. Smaller room, smaller heat signature, smaller list of things that can fail all at once. That becomes the job now. Not steel inspection, not salvage prep. Hold heat, hold water, hold doors. Watch the fuel line, watch the dark. Keep one room alive inside a dead site. I stop treating the service block as one building and start treating it as separate problems stacked inside each other. The outer corridor becomes a cold shell where I leave shovels, scrap, and anything that can freeze without ruining it. The former splice room stays warm enough to sleep in and keep water liquid. The little notch between them, no bigger than a supply closet, turns into the place where I watch the doors, set tools down, and keep the rifle where I can reach it without digging under blankets and boxes. I strip the radio room for shelves and drag them across the floor one at a time. I move half the food into the old cable tray compartment behind a bolted plate. I move spare gloves, lamp batteries, and heater parts into a crate that fits under the workbench. If someone gets inside and takes the first things he sees, I do not want him leaving with all of it in one trip. Yusuf sleeps through part of that, and wakes for the rest. When he is clear, he helps in the only way he can. He keeps a pencil in his hand and writes what I say when my gloves are dirty or my hands are full. Fuel used overnight, water melted, heater burn rate, generator hours, which doors I checked, and which seals I patched. He also tells me what not to touch. The second transfer pump at the fuel berm has been leaking for months. The old breaker box in the radio room trips when the wall heater and the bench sockets run together. The Snowcat batteries in the machine shed are dead enough to waste time on, but not dead enough to strip for clean acid without a mess. I write all that down on cardboard, tape it to the inner wall, and keep adding to it. The list grows faster than I like. Petru does not hit the chase door again before noon, but I hear movement back there when the generator loads up. It is not a steady scrape. It is a drag, then a pause, then another drag. That tells me he is not waiting at the panel. He is moving through the chase itself, bumping cable trays and service brackets with his shoulders or boots. I cannot let that space stay open if he is in it. The chase runs under half the block and comes close to the machine shed footing before it turns toward the old mast base. If there is a broken vent cover or a frost-heaved hatch anywhere along that run, he can come back to the door from a different angle or disappear into the drift and come at us from outside again. I cut a square of plate from an old cabinet side, pack the torn vent opening with insulation, then bolt the plate over the whole lower panel through the door skin and frame. It takes longer than I want, but once the nuts are torqued down, nothing short of tools is getting back through there. The weather opens for about 20 minutes after midday. Not blue sky, not good visibility. The wind eases, and the loose snow stops moving low across the yard. I use the gap. I throw on my outer layers, hood the lamp, and go outside with 2 jerry cans, a shovel, and a length of survey tape. I do not walk to the strip. I do not stand in open ground. I work the lee side of the service block, cut a trench toward the machine shed wall, and bury 1 full can and 1 half-full can in a marked spot under packed snow and a bent piece of conduit. If the main room burns, if someone takes the visible fuel, or if the group that made the tracks comes back and goes straight for the generator can rack, I need something left that is not in the first sweep. I get back inside with ice crusting the front of my hood and snow packed into the folds of my sleeves, then shut the inner door and sit on the floor long enough to scrape my boots clean before I cross into the warm room. Yusuf watches me do that and asks what I saw outside. I tell him nothing moving and 1 snow bridge drift forming against the north wall. He nods once and asks for the clock. I tell him the time. He looks at the cardboard fuel list and asks me to add 1 more line under the generator notes. Check intake stack every 4 hours. I write it. He closes his eyes again and presses the heel of his hand over his forehead. The fever does not come at him in clean steps. He gets better for 10 minutes, then worse for an hour, then clear again long enough to make sense. His leg has gone hard with swelling above the splint. The bandages stay clean on the surface for a while and then show a slow, dark spread that creeps back through the cloth. I have antibiotics. I start him on them even though I cannot tell whether they will do anything. I do not tell him that part. I hand him the tablets with melted water and keep moving. Near evening I hear the first engine. It starts faint, cuts out, then starts again. I do not go to the window right away. I kill the room light, wait, and listen for a second machine or a third. I hear 2 engines now, one rougher than the other, both climbing and dropping with the terrain. I move to the upper service slit I left under the plywood and ease 1 corner back with a gloved thumb. 2 snowmobiles come over the low ridge west of the site with 1 freight sled behind the rear machine. They do not rush in. They slow as soon as the service block comes into view. 4 people ride the machines, 1 on each seat and 1 standing on the runners behind the sled. A 5th person is on the freight sled under blankets and a tarp, propped against tied crates. The lead machine turns toward the berm and then away from it. The rear machine makes a full circle beyond the strip to read the site from different angles. Whoever is driving that one knows what he is doing. They stop a long way off first, engines idling. The rider on the lead machine gets off and walks a few steps forward with both hands away from his body. He is tall, broad through the shoulders even under winter gear, and careful in the way he places his boots. He is not panicked. He is taking in doors, roof lines, drifts, and any sign of recent work. The second rider stays on the machine and keeps the nose pointed half away from the block. That tells me they are not committed to coming closer. The person on the sled does not move. After half a minute, the tall man raises one arm and calls out in Danish, then in English. He says they are short on fuel, weatherbound, and looking for shelter for one night. His voice carries clean in the cold. It sounds practiced, not desperate. I leave the plywood where it is and answer from deeper in the room so he cannot judge the exact spot. I tell him the site is occupied, medical isolation is in effect, and no one comes inside. That gets them talking among themselves. I hear a woman's voice first, low and quick. Then another man, sharper, impatient, speaking too fast for the words to carry. The tall man lifts his chin toward the block and asks how many are inside. I do not answer that. I tell him there is fever in the building, and one man already turned violent. That part is close enough to true to work. He waits before he responds. Then he says his name is Stig Halvorsen, and the man on the sled is hurt from the road and the cold, not sick from the thing going around. He asks for hot water and a place out of the wind to let the man warm up. I tell him I can leave hot water outside once they back off beyond the strip markers. The sharper voice starts up again after that, louder this time. The woman cuts him off. I hear the lead machine rev once and die back down. We do it that way. I boil water in 2 insulated jugs, add a roll of bandage, pain tablets, and 1 spare fuel filter, then carry the bundle to the old cargo pallet near the strip while they wait back by the sled. I keep the rifle slung and the hood low, and do not go past the line where the drift leaves me no cover. Stig sees the rifle and lifts both hands a little to show he has heard the message. The woman beside the rear machine watches my boots, my hands, and the way I move, not my face. She is the one I keep looking at. Mechanics notice details that others skip. If she reads the path I used from the service block, she will know which drift I came through and where the ground is packed. I set the jugs down, back away, and go inside before they approach the pallet. Once the inner barrier is shut, I climb up again and watch through the slit. There are 5 of them after all. Stig is the leader by the way the others look to him before they move. The woman is about my age or a little older, narrow face, dark braid tucked down the back of her jacket, hands that go straight to the fuel filter and turn it over before she touches the tablets. She checks parts by habit. The sharp voice belongs to a man with a wool cap pulled low and a carbine hanging across his chest. He moves too much. He keeps turning his head instead of his shoulders and walks out from the others whenever Stig stops talking. The younger one rides the rear machine. He is lean, slow in the way he steps off, with a face that still shows what he thinks before he hides it. The 5th man on the sled is older than the rest, wrapped up to the chin, one side of his face pale and stiff. He does not get down. The woman pours water into a cup, tests it, then helps him drink without removing the rifle from her shoulder. Efficient, no waste. They do not leave. That tells me more than anything Stig says. He inspects the jerry cans hanging off the sled frame, speaks to the younger man, then points at the nearer prefab. They move that way in a group, not spread out. Good discipline. Bad news for me. The sharp man peels off and heads toward the machine shed until Stig calls him back. He comes back, but he looks over at the shed twice before he does. The woman kneels by the older man on the sled and checks his hands under the blanket. Frostbite or old cold damage. Hard to tell at this distance. The younger one starts scraping snow away from the prefab door with a shovel off the sled. They are not asking anymore. They are choosing where to settle, which means they do not have fuel to spend looking for better ground before dark. I go down from the window, check the door bars again, and start preparing for a night with other people on the site. Yusuf is awake when I tell him what has arrived. He asks how many machines. I say 2. He asks whether either one sounds healthy. I tell him one does and one does not. He says the healthy one will become the group machine as soon as fuel gets thin and parts start disappearing. He has seen that before on remote jobs. One vehicle gets favored, the other gets stripped without ceremony. Then he tells me to get every visible tool with a battery or fuel line inside the warm room. I do that. Drills, grinder, spare lamp packs, canisters, hose clamps, anything that could keep a machine alive or get a door open. I leave the broken things and the heavy scrap in the cold shell. If someone gets into the corridor, I want him carrying junk while the useful parts stay hidden. After that, I take the last intact junction box from the shelf, wire a small bulb and battery to it, and build a decoy light for the far prefab. If I can make them think I am sleeping somewhere else, I might get one quiet night before they start testing the block. The decoy costs me an hour and a pair of numb hands. I run a thin line through the old conduit trench under drifting snow, feed a weak work light into the prefab from the back panel, and hang a blanket to break the beam so it pulses when the wind moves the fabric. From a distance, it looks like someone shifting inside with a low lamp. I do not use much battery on it. I only need it to be noticed once. When I get back into the service block, I change socks, dry my gloves by the heater, and hear the first knock on the outer door before I can sit down. 3 firm hits. Not random. Stig again. I stay behind the shelving barrier and answer through the metal. He says they are taking the prefab for the night and asks whether anyone will object. I tell him the prefab heater line is isolated and the walls leak on the north side. He says they will make do. Then he asks whether there is any medical training inside. I look at Yusuf on the mattress and tell Stig no. He does not argue. He says the older man's name is Thomas Burke and his feet have gone numb since morning. He asks for more hot water in an hour. I tell him I will consider it if no one comes near the service doors and no one touches the generator housing. The sharp man says something low after that. Stig replies without raising his voice. Their boots move away across the corridor side drift. I wait until the sound is gone before I move from my spot. Yusuf asks whether I believe the injury story. I tell him yes and no. Thomas is hurt. That part I believe. I do not believe they are here only to let him warm up. Stig saw the shovel marks around the generator, the patched roof seam, the clear exhaust line at the service shaft, and the packed foot route between the block and the berm. He knows someone inside is organized. That means heat, fuel, food, and walls. Men like him do not ride away from that unless they have something better already. Night comes on with cloud and no moon. The decoy works sooner than I expected. I hear boots outside the far prefab, then the sharp man's voice, then the woman telling him to wait. I climb to the slit and watch through the gap. They have one lantern lit low under a tarp windbreak, and a stovepipe jammed through the prefab window with snow packed around the gap. Fast work. The woman did that. Stig stands off to one side, watching the dark around the service block instead of helping. The sharp man walks toward the decoy prefab with his carbine down by one hand. He stops 10 feet short and stares at the pulse of the weak light through the blanket. The younger man, Lars, stays near the snowmobiles. He keeps glancing toward the coast route as if he expects more machines, or fears them. Stig lets the sharp man walk up to the prefab and touch the door. The man pushes it open, steps inside, and comes out again almost at once. He looks toward the block. The decoy did not fool him for long, but it did one useful thing. It drew his first test away from my actual door. The first real test comes after midnight. I am half asleep against the wall with the rifle across my knees, when the outer corridor alarms chatter once, then again. Not wind. Metal kissing metal in a line, one after another. I rise, shut the heater damper a fraction to lower the burn, and move to the gap between the shelving and the wall. Someone works along the corridor side of the block with a gloved hand, touching door frame, lock plate, and handle. He is careful, not yanking, not bashing. The handle turns and stops against the bar. A minute later, the same hand tries the generator housing latch outside. Then the machine shed. Then the service window cover. He is mapping reactions. I do not shout. I do not move the lamp. After another minute, I hear Stig's voice from farther out telling Niels to leave it and come back. So the sharp man has a name now. Niels makes a noise of irritation and steps away. The alarms stop. I stay awake until dawn. Morning gives us a clear sky for 1 hour and no comfort with it. Good visibility means we can all see each other. Stig uses that. He comes to the strip alone with empty hands and asks for a conversation in the open. I keep the inner door between us and answer from behind the barrier. He asks again how many are inside. I tell him enough. He says he has no interest in a fight this far from anywhere and no interest in wasting fuel trying to guess how much resistance sits behind one steel door. Then he says what he wants. Diesel. enough to get one machine and the sled to the next coastal depot before weather closes again. In return, he offers a crate of dried fish, 2 spare drive belts, and the promise that his people leave the site untouched. I tell him promises travel light and burn no fuel. He laughs at that, not warmly, and says, I am not wrong. Then he asks how long I can hold the place if the heater dies. That is the first sentence he says that is not part of a trade. I answer with a lie. I tell him the heater is not my only heat source, and the block has more people than beds. That is enough to slow him. If he thinks there are 2 or 3 of us still moving around inside, he has to calculate noise, lines of fire, and the chance of his people being trapped in a corridor with a second person behind them. He says he can wait a day. I tell him waiting burns fuel too. He says not if a person knows how to shut down and sit in one place. Then he asks for more water for Thomas, and I say I will leave it at the pallet after noon. Stig steps away from the door without another word. He is patient. I do not like patient men in a place where every hour costs me something. Yusuf is worse by then. The antibiotics upset his stomach and the fever scrambles his timing. He asks for the wrench board from the machine shed and then gets angry when I hand him the med cup. 10 minutes later he is clear enough to apologize and ask whether the generator note has been updated. I change his bandage and find the leg swollen above and below the splint with a heat that comes through the cloth. The skin around the wound edges is dark and tight. I know what that means even without a doctor in the room. I clean what I can, replace the wrap, and keep my face still while I do it. He watches me once, and then looks away, which tells me he knows too. He tells me there are 2 spare injectors in the loader parts crate under the radio table, and I should move them before outsiders start taking inventory by sound and shape. He is right, so I do it. At noon, I carry the second hot water out with 1 extra item added to the bundle. A note written in block letters on a flap of ration box. No approach after dark. No tools against doors. Next step ends trade. I leave that with the jugs and back away. When Stig comes to collect them, he reads the note and folds it into his pocket. Neil stands behind him with his carbine and says something about taking the generator instead of waiting for it. Stig does not turn. He only says the man inside is not the only problem on this site. I file that away. Stig has noticed something else. Either the chase drag, an old track line, or a sign in the drift where Petru crossed during the storm. The woman, Freya, kneels by Thomas and unwraps 1 boot enough to inspect the toes. She does not like what she sees. Lars keeps 1 hand on the healthy snowmobile's handlebar and watches my window cover. He is learning the same way Freya learned, but slower. The next bad turn comes from fuel. Near mid-afternoon, Niels and Lars drag 2 old drums out from the berm line and start working on them with a hand pump. I did not leave those there by accident. 1 is half water from bad storage. The other is mostly sludge and old diesel that has separated in the cold. If they are desperate enough, they will try to filter it. Freya knows better. She walks over, kicks 1 drum, opens the top, smells it, and says something sharp to Niels. He waves her off and keeps going. Stig lets it happen. That tells me his group is already running low enough that he has to allow stupid work in hope of gain. I watch through the slit while they argue. Thomas is off the sled now and sitting against the prefab wall with blankets over his knees. He looks smaller than yesterday and keeps both hands jammed under his arms. When he shifts, I see 1 boot is unlaced and the foot inside does not move normally. The old drum comes apart fast. Niels jerks the pump handle too hard. The pickup hose slips, and he has to lean over the opening to reset it. He does not see the drift at the berm edge move. I do. The snow sags first, then breaks along a line about 4 feet wide. A person buried there under wind-packed crust and old canvas rises halfway and catches the side of the drum with both hands. The motion is stiff, jerking, slowed by frozen layers, but it has force behind it. Niels falls sideways. The drum tips. Sludge and diesel splash over his mittens and the snow. The figure comes out farther, face covered by a scarf crusted solid to the mouth area, 1 arm bent under the body as if it's set that way in the cold. Lars backs off so fast he trips over the pump hose and falls. Freya reaches the drift first with a snow shovel and drives the blade down across the figure's upper back. Stig closes in with a pry bar and hammers at the shoulders and neck until the movement quits. It takes longer than I want to watch. When it stops, no one talks for a few seconds. Then everyone starts talking at once. Niels is on his feet, swearing, looking at his sleeve and glove. Thomas is trying to stand and not getting there. Lars points at the figure and then toward the side road as if he wants to leave immediately. Freya rips Niels's mitten off, checks his wrist and lower forearm, then yanks his sleeve higher. I cannot see the skin clearly, but I see her face flatten, and I know there is damage there. Not a clean scrape from falling. Something worse. Stig notices it too. He looks toward the service block right after he sees the arm. That is the part that matters to me. He is already recalculating with a hurt man in camp, and another may be turning by nightfall. Freya wraps the forearm with a bandage from the bundle I gave them, adds tape over it, and says something hard enough that Niels steps in toward her before Stig blocks him with one arm. Lars gets the fallen pump and hose out of the sludge while looking anywhere but at Niels's bandaged arm. After that, the whole site changes tone. No one wanders alone. Freya keeps the good machine on the far side of camp and drains its tank into smaller cans she can control. Stig makes Lars drag the bad fuel drums farther from the prefab and bury the spill with snow. Niels disappears inside their shelter for half an hour and comes out with a fresh layer on and his carbine tight across his chest. He walks a perimeter around the block twice and looks in every drift gap where someone might crawl or hide. I do not think he is guarding the camp. I think he is trying not to sit still with whatever is happening in his arm. By evening, he starts carrying the carbine in one hand and flexing the taped arm as if it has gone numb. The older man, Thomas, cannot get comfortable. He is either freezing in place or too close to their stove. Every adjustment costs him time and effort. Freya spends half her energy keeping the camp from turning into panic. Yusuf hears part of that through the wall and asks me what happened. I tell him one buried infected came out of the berm drift and got one of the men on the arm. Yusuf lies quiet for a bit and then says he'll hide it if the leader lets him. I tell him the leader already knows. Yusuf says that is worse. He asks me for the pencil, writes 3 words on the cardboard with slow, ugly print, and hands it back. Block tunnel hatch. I stare at it a second too long. He points toward the floor, and then the far corner of the cold corridor. There is an old inspection hatch there under a welded plate and 2 cabinets. I knew about it. I had not counted it as a live path. He says the utility trench below it meets the chase run near the machine shed foundation. If Stig looks long enough, or if Freya reads the site drawings still rolled in the radio room drawer, they will find it. I move the cabinets as soon as Yusuf drops the pencil. The hatch is uglier than I remembered. Frost has swelled the edges. The plate over it is welded at 4 corners and stitch welded along one side only. A cutting wheel would take it. A long pry bar and time might take it too. I bolt a second plate over the first through the floor slab anchors from an old rack mount, then stack spare drum collars and a full crate of scrap fasteners over the top. It is not elegant. It adds noise and delay, which is what I need. While I work, Petru drags something metal in the chase again. The sound moves under the corridor and then away. Stig was right about one thing. I am not the only problem on this site. If his people start opening buried spaces and frost-heaved access points looking for another way in, they may meet Petru before they meet me. That could stop them. It could also drive one of them straight at my door. The second night is colder and meaner than the first. Niels starts shouting around dusk. Not full sentences, bursts. One accusation at Lars about fuel, another at Freya about bandages. Then he goes quiet so suddenly, I leave the slit and check the heater flame. I think for a second he has fallen apart outside. He has not. He comes to the strip 10 minutes later and calls to the block in a voice that is almost friendly. He asks for disinfectant, asks whether anyone inside has antibiotics, asks whether the fever story was a lie to keep them out. Stig tells him to get back to the prefab before I answer. I do not answer anyway. Niels keeps standing there in the dark until Freya walks over, takes him by the unhurt sleeve, and pulls him toward the shelter. He goes with her, but only after staring at the window cover long enough that I am sure he knows exactly where I am listening from. I do not get much sleep. Around the middle of the night, Thomas starts groaning in his shelter whenever the stove dies down. Freya relights it twice. Lars makes a trip to the snowmobiles with a can and comes back empty-handed. Stig does not sleep at all, as far as I can tell. He sits under the tarp windbreak with the lantern low and keeps his back to the prefab wall so he can see both machines and the block. He is waiting for either me or Niels to make the first hard move. Near dawn, I catch a shape at the very edge of the berm line moving low and uneven. Not one of Stig's people. It goes from the spill site toward the machine shed, stops, then disappears behind the drift. Petru, or another one. I do not know. I know enough not to open the door to check. The morning brings a thin, pale sky and no exit for anyone. Snow has filled half the strip again. The coast route is wind-scoured in places and drifted shut in others. Freya spends an hour on the bad machine with tools laid out on a tarp, trying to get more life from it without burning the last good fuel in tuning attempts. Lars helps when she tells him exactly what to hold and what not to touch. Thomas stays wrapped in blankets with one boot off and both socks hanging near the prefab stove. The skin of his foot, what little I see, is mottled and grey. Niels does not come out for a long time. When he does, his face has that flat look Petru had before the door started shaking. He walks too fast for the ground, and then stops as if he forgot where he was going. Stig steps in front of him once, speaks low, and gets no answer. That is when Stig looks at my service block not as a trade partner or a holdout, but as a thing he may need before his own camp breaks apart. He comes to the door before noon with Freya beside him. Freya does the talking. Smart. She keeps her hands visible and her voice level. She says Niels was hurt at the berm and has a fever coming on. She says Thomas's feet are failing and one machine will not make the next route without parts and a warm engine start. She says if I let one person into my cold corridor for 2 hours with no weapon and no access to the inner room, she can repair any damage they have done to the service block and improve the generator run. She has noticed the slight miss in the engine note. I hate that she is good enough to hear it from outside. I tell her the answer is no. She says then at least trade for injector cleaner, hose clamps, or a battery charge. Stig stands a step back saying nothing. He lets her make the reasonable case while he watches for weakness. I tell them I have a sick man inside and cannot add another body to the airflow. Freya's face changes at that. Not sympathy, calculation. She is deciding whether I am telling the truth about sickness or using it as cover. Then Niels starts shouting from the prefab and the whole conversation ends. Niels staggers out with the bandaged arm hanging low. He is not frothing, not raging. None of the things frightened people describe when they want a neat line between sick and dangerous. He looks hot, unsteady, and fixed on one point too hard. He keeps saying Freya's name and then Thomas's and then mine, though I never told them my name. He must have heard one of the others say it at some point. Lars goes for him first and gets shoved back. Stig grabs the carbine sling, twists it away, and throws the weapon under the tarp windbreak. Niels comes at him with both hands, the bad arm slow and the good one fast. Stig hits him once with an open palm under the chin, and once in the chest to put him back against the prefab wall. Freya gets between them with a shovel shaft across Niels's torso and drives him down into a sitting position. The whole camp goes silent, except for Niels cursing and trying to stand again. I back away from the door and start moving my last visible fuel can toward the hidden plate compartment under the bench. By mid-afternoon, Stig has Niels tied by one wrist to the prefab frame support inside the doorway. He did not tie the ankles. That tells me he is not fully ready to admit what he is seeing. Freya and Lars keep their distance from him unless he lunges. Thomas cannot do anything except watch. The air around their camp feels thinner even through steel and drift. Every sound carries more weight. A dropped tool gets everyone looking. A stove door clang turns heads. Stig comes to the pallet near the strip and leaves something there without calling out. I wait 10 minutes before I check through the slit. It is Niels's carbine, magazine removed, bolt locked back with a strip of cloth through the action, and a note weighted under it. 1 can diesel. Last trade. I do not trust gifts left by men with tied sick friends, but I understand the meaning. Stig is paying for time. 1 can buys him a chance to move a machine, warm an engine, or get Lars and Freya to stay loyal for a few more hours. I do not take the weapon or answer. The next break in the pattern comes from Lars. It is almost dark when he appears alone on the corridor side of the block. No rifle, no hands in his pockets. walking slowly enough that I can stop him if I need to. He does not knock first. He says through the door that he wants to talk without Stig hearing. I tell him to talk from where he stands. He says Niels is getting worse. Stig wants to wait until morning, and Freya wants to leave before the road seals. Thomas cannot ride long and may not keep his foot. They came here from a hunting depot east of Maniitzok after another group stripped their fuel. They followed a contractor route packet Thomas had taken from a harbour office desk weeks earlier. The packet marked this site as decommissioned but serviceable, with fuel storage and heated structures. That part lands exactly where I expected it to. Lars says Stig will open the utility hatch tonight if I do not trade. He says Freya already found the buried plate corner under the corridor cabinets when she helped drag their stovepipe yesterday, and saw the floor scuffing through the open prefab door. I let that sit for a second. Then I ask why Lars is telling me. He says he does not want to be inside the site when Niels breaks loose, or when Stig starts forcing doors. He says Freya is better than the others but will follow Stig if he can still get Thomas out. He says he can drive the good machine. He can siphon without spilling half the line. And he can leave tonight if he gets enough fuel to make the Cove station south of the cliffs. There is no plea in it. He is trying to bargain the same way Stig did, only without pretending it is honorable. I tell him I cannot let anyone into the warm room. He says he will take the cold corridor and a blanket for 1 hour if that gets him out of the wind while he waits for the machine to cool for repair. I do not answer yes. I do not answer no. I tell him to come back after full dark and alone. No weapons. No sudden movement. Then I go to Yusuf and ask him if he can sit up for 10 minutes on his own. Yusuf can, barely. He understands enough when I explain what Lars told me. He says Stig will use Freya on the hatch and keep Lars on the machine for a fast exit if it works. He says if I am going to let Lars into the corridor at all, I need 3 rules, and no exceptions. Strip outer layers at the threshold, hands visible every second, no crossing the shelving barrier. Then Yusuf asks whether I trust Lars. I tell him no. Yusuf nods. Good. After that, he asks me to help him sit with his back against the wall instead of lying flat. He says he wants to hear the machines if they start. I prop him up with folded blankets and wedge a tool case at his shoulder to keep him from sliding. He grips the edge of the mattress once, hard, then lets go. I put the rifle within reach and keep the pry bar for myself. Lars comes back in full dark with a blanket rolled under one arm and no visible weapon. I make him stop 10 feet from the outer door while I light the corridor lamp and open only the first barrier. He takes off his mittens, drops them, opens his parka, turns once, and lets me see his belt and pockets. Knife only. I tell him to leave it on the snow. He does. I let him into the cold shell and bar the door behind him before he can get a good look at the inner room. The first thing he does is stand with his eyes closed for 2 seconds in the corridor, not from relief, from the sudden lack of wind and engine noise. Then he opens them and looks at everything anyway, smart enough to take it in quickly. I keep him on the far side of the shelving barrier and hand him a mug of hot water through the gap. He drinks half and forces himself to slow down on the rest. Good self-control. I ask him for the exact layout of Stig's plan. He tells me they will come at the hatch first, then the generator housing if the hatch fails. Not the main door. Stig thinks the main door is where I want them looking. Lars also tells me one thing I did not expect. Freya found signs near the machine shed foundation that something has been moving under the drifts. Scrape marks at the frost vent, a sleeve piece frozen into a rebar hook. She told Stig the lower utility run is not empty. Stig said that makes it better. If there is an active sick person under there, it may have come from my side, which means I am stretched thinner than I claim. If it comes from their side, they can drive it toward my door and let confusion do some work for them. I do not like hearing my situation laid out in someone else's words, but Lars is not wrong. He says he will not stay for a breach attempt. He wants fuel and out. I tell him I can give him 1 small can if he helps me first. He asks with what. I point to the corridor floor and say we are going to make the hatch louder. For the next hour, Lars and I work without him crossing the barrier. I pass him chain, scrap plate, bolts, and 2 lengths of bent angle steel. He tightens what I point to, adds loose washers under pressure points so any movement chatters, and helps me anchor a dead loader tooth over the hatch plate so a pry bar cannot get straight purchase. Then, I send him back into the dark through the side drift with one 5-liter can under his blanket and strict instructions not to come near the block again that night. He leaves the corridor, retrieves his knife from the snow, and vanishes into the dark on the lee side rather than walking back through the strip. Good. If Stig sees him return from the main approach with a can, the camp fractures early and in the wrong direction. I shut the outer door, rebar it, and stand listening until I hear the faint buzz of the good machine turn over once and die again. Lars reached it. Yusuf lasts another 3 hours before the wound starts taking more out of him than the fever alone did. He stops asking where Dale is. He stops asking for time. He asks for his mother once, and then for the wrench board again, softer this time. His hands fumble at the blanket seam, as if he is trying to line something up that is not there. I keep him drinking when he can swallow, and keep the lamp low so the room does not get hotter than it has to. After midnight, he grips my sleeve and says, if the generator dies, do not go for the loader batteries first. Go for the mast equipment cabinet. There is one deep cycle battery in there from a survey setup they never logged. Then he lets go and closes his eyes. I sit there long enough to make sure he is still with me. Then I get up and move the last of my paper notes into my jacket pocket. If the room burns or floods with smoke, I do not want the ledger left on a wall. The hatch attempt begins near 1 in the morning, not with shouting, with metal working under the floor and the chain alarm giving out its first stuttering rattle. Then, a low voice, Stig's, telling someone to lift slower. Freya answers from farther back. She is on the tools. I can hear the difference between her motion and Stig's weight. Freya uses steady pressure. Stig braces and pulls. The loader tooth bangs once against the plate. Washers chatter. The crate of scrap fasteners shifts an inch. Good. Noise buys time. I kill the corridor lamp and leave only the inner room light on behind the barrier, so anyone who gets through sees brightness where I want him looking and darkness where I am. Petru starts moving in the chase at the same time, drawn by the vibration under the floor. The drag comes closer, then a hard blow against metal somewhere below the corridor. Freya hears it. I know she does because the hatch noise stops for 2 full breaths. Stig says something I cannot catch. Freya answers, sharp. Then the prying starts again, harder now, faster, the cautious phase gone. The hatch plate groans but holds. Petru hits below them a second time. Niels starts shouting from the prefab outside. I hear his boots in the snow, then Thomas yelling once, then Lars's machine coughing to life and cutting back out. Too many things all at once. That is when Stig makes the mistake I expected from a patient man pushed too far. He leaves the hatch. I hear him running for the corridor side exterior wall, likely to split me between the floor and the door. Freya stays 1 beat longer at the hatch, and then follows. I move to the outer door and wait in the shelving shadow. The first impact on the handle is Stig's shoulder. The second is a tool head against the lock plate. He is done pretending now. I do not answer the impacts. I let him hit steel and wonder what sits behind it. Freya comes up after him and says something about the generator line. She wants him off the door and onto the systems. She is thinking of heat, not force. Stig ignores her. The lock plate bends a fraction. The bar takes the rest. Then gunfire cracks outside. 1 shot, then another, both from near the prefab. Niels got free or someone untied him. The sound in that cold air is flat and huge. Every loose thing on the site seems to ring with it. Petru goes wild under the floor at once, slamming through the chase toward the corridor side. Something else answers from the berm line or the machine shed vent. Another thud, another dragging rush through crusted snow. I am not dealing with one problem anymore. Freya hears it too. She stops Stig by the sleeve and says a word loud enough for me to catch. Move! For the first time, fear shows in her voice through simple fact. Open ground with gunfire and active infected is not a place she can work. The door hits stop. Boots tear away across the drift. I climb to the slit and look. Niels is out in the open between the prefab and the strip with the carbine in one hand and the bandaged arm hanging useless. He fires again at nothing I can see, then turns too slowly when Petru comes out of a break in the drift behind him. Petru is missing 1 glove and part of 1 sleeve, face half covered in ice. Movement rough and uneven until the last few steps when he closes on Niels. Niels tries to raise the carbine and cannot manage it in time. He goes down under the collision. Freya is already running for the good machine. Stig heads for Thomas. grabs the older man under the arms, and hauls him toward the sled. Lars is at the rear machine, face turned toward the strip as if he cannot choose between leaving and helping. Another shape moves near the berm spill site, low and crooked, maybe the same buried one from earlier, not finished cleanly. Maybe another. I do not stand there and watch the site sort itself. I go for the generator shutoff. Dark changes the fight in my favor more than light does. I kill the generator, drop the block into sudden silence except for wind and outside noise, and let the heater run on its own tank for the moment. That takes the glow off the service slit, kills the exterior hum Stig was using to judge the block, and throws every eye outside onto the machines and the men in the snow. Then, I pull the emergency vent lever I rigged earlier for the corridor shell. It opens the north maintenance panel half an inch and lets the wind start packing snow through the outer crack. If Stig comes back to the door now, he does it blind, in drift, while the corridor fills low from the north side. I take the rifle and move Yusuf's mattress farther from the shelving barrier by dragging it with both hands under his shoulders. He opens his eyes once and asks what broke. I tell him stay quiet. He nods and goes still again. Outside, engines rise. One machine catches clean, the other grinds and fails. Someone shouts for fuel. Someone else shouts a name I cannot make out. Then, the good machine takes off, circles once too wide in the dark, and clips the end of the strip marker line before straightening toward the coast track. One rider only. Lars or Freya. I cannot tell from the angle. Stig stays. He is at the sled with Thomas now, trying to get the older man on without exposing himself to the thing moving near Niels. Niels is no longer shouting. Petru is over him in the drift, movement shorter now, more jerking than before. The second shape at the berm comes nearer and then stops when the machine noise recedes. Without the generator running, the site loses one of the signals that was drawing them in. Good. Bad too, since the room temperature starts dropping right away. The corridor hatch alarm goes again. Freya or Stig left the tools there, and now the hatch is shifting under pressure from below. Not from a pry bar this time. Petru or the other one is under the run, hitting whatever moves. I leave the slit and get back to the floor just as the loader tooth jumps against the plate and the crate of fasteners tips, spilling bolts across the concrete. I stack a second locker over the hatch path and wedge it with the hand truck. The floor hums once under my boots as something slams up from beneath, then twice more. The welded plate does not break, but the cabinet bolts pop on one side. I cannot fight the floor and the exterior all night. I make a hard choice and drag the last visible food crate out of the corridor into the warm room. If the cold shell goes, I am not losing rations with it. Then, I shut the inner barrier completely for the first time and chain it, even though that means giving up half the block. Stig comes back after what feels like 10 minutes and is probably 3. He does not hit the outer door right away. He calls through it instead. He says Niels is done, Thomas cannot ride, and one machine is gone. He says Freya left with Lars and the only good fuel hose. I hear the strain in his voice now, not panic, exhaustion forced through control. He says if I let him and Thomas into the cold shell, he will leave every weapon outside and help hold the outer section until daylight. He says there are at least 2 active out there and maybe more under the drifts. I believe that last part. I do not believe the bargain holds after sunrise. I tell him to move Thomas to the far prefab and use the stove. He says Thomas will not last another night in that shell. I tell him that is not my door. There is a long silence after that. Then he says, "All right," in a voice emptied of everything else, and his boots crunch away. I hear Thomas crying out once while Stig drags him. It is not a speech or a plea. It is one sound from a man whose feet are gone and whose arms do not have strength left for the ground. Then nothing from him for a while. Stig gets him into the prefab and the stove starts again. I check the heater tank. Less than half now. I cannot keep the warm room at full burn until dawn and survive another day. I cut the setting, pull on a second sweater, and start the mast battery search Yusuf mentioned. The cabinet is in the outer corridor by the service corner. That means stepping back into the cold shell with the generator off, drift leaking through the north crack, and whatever is under the floor still banging from time to time. I take the lamp hooded, crack the inner barrier, and move low. Every step pushes bolts and loose washers across the concrete with little metallic ticks that sound too loud in the dark. The mast battery is where Yusuf said it would be, strapped in a survey transit case behind old cable spools. I haul it out, nearly lose grip once, and get it behind the inner barrier before a heavy blow lands under the hatch and lifts the hand truck wheel off the floor. That is enough for me. I shut the barrier, chain it again, and do not go back. The battery is not enough to run heat. It is enough for a lamp, the radio in short bursts, and the little blower on the smallest electric element if I strip the circuit down to bare need. I build a wire lead with alligator clamps and get the backup lamp running over Yusuf's shoulder. Then, I try the radio once, a burst of static, a clipped male voice calling a harbor name I cannot catch, then dead air. I conserve what is left. Talking to no one burns the same battery as useful work. Toward dawn, the outside noise shifts again. The stove in the prefab goes quiet. Then I hear Stig moving alone. No Thomas voice with him, no second set of steps. He works around the site in a careful circle, dragging something at first and then leaving it. He checks the snowmobile tracks to the coast, the berm, the machine shed, the outer side of my block. He is searching for which threat is closest now that his group has fallen apart. When he reaches the corridor side, he stops above the hatch location and says through the wall that Thomas is dead. He says it flat, without room for answer. Then he says he is leaving at first light on foot for the Cove station, if the weather gives him any line of travel at all. He asks for 1 bottle of water and 1 strip of pain tablets, no more. He says Freya and Lars have the machine and the only chance of reaching settled ground fast. He is not bargaining now. He is inventorying the last terms he can live with. I make him wait. That is not cruelty. That is me taking time to listen for another voice close behind him, another step, a weapon shifting from one hand to another. I hear nothing except wind and one faint impact under the floor, farther away now. I fill 1 bottle, add the tablets, and leave them on the pallet outside after the sky starts to grey. Stig takes them without approaching the block again. He also leaves one thing in return. Not on the pallet, at the edge of the strip, clearly visible from my slit. Freya's tool roll, the one she laid out beside the bad machine the morning before. It is a mechanic's trade offering payment to another mechanic or a worker who kept the site running. I understand it for what it is. Not friendship. Respect mixed with necessity. I wait until he is a dark shape moving south along the drift line before I go out and take the roll. Morning after the siege is colder than the days before, though I know that is only the site stripped down around me. 1 snowmobile is gone with Lars and Freya. The second sits dead by the prefab, half stripped, hood open, 1 side panel missing. Thomas is inside the prefab under 2 blankets with the stove out. I do not go close until I have watched the whole site for 20 minutes from the slit. Niels lies where Petru hit him near the strip line, but Petru is gone. The berm drift shows a drag path toward the machine shed vent, and then nothing I can read. I take the rifle, cross the yard on the packed route I know best, and go first to the generator housing. Intake half iced again. Belt tension acceptable, fuel line intact. I bring it back up in stages and listen to the note. Freya was right. There is a miss under load, injector or air in the line. I can fix that later if later exists. Thomas is dead when I reach the prefab. No movement, no heat left in the shelter. No sign he ever got back on his feet after Stig dragged him in. I take what I can use from their camp and do it fast. Stove fuel, half a carton of dried fish, 2 clean bandage rolls, 1 spare spark plug, a box of mixed fasteners, and the carbine magazine that Stig never reclaimed from the strip. I leave the rest. Weight and time decide the salvage, not greed. From the dead machine, I pull the fuel line section I still need, 1 good clamp, and the small tool pouch tucked under the seat. Then, I drag a tarp over the more obvious signs of occupation and scatter drift back over their footpaths where I can. The site does not become safe after a group leaves. It becomes visible in a new way. Fresh camp means fresh rumor. Fresh rumor means more people if routes open. When I get back inside, Yusuf is breathing in little rough catches and not waking on command. I use the saved hot water to clean his face, check the leg once more, and know from the smell under the bandage that I am out of time there too. He does wake once in the afternoon. He opens his eyes, looks at the inner wall where the cardboard notes used to hang, and asks whether the generator is running. I tell him yes. Then he asks whether the weather broke. I tell him enough to see the berm. He nods. I think he is about to say something else, but he only looks at the lamp over his shoulder until his eyes close again. He dies before dark. No struggle. No last speech. 1 minute he is there with his hand resting on the blanket seam, and the next minute that hand is only a hand. I sit beside him until the heater clicks and makes me move. I do not leave him in the warm room. I wrap him in the spare canvas, secure it with cord, and drag him into the cold shell after I make sure the floor hatch is quiet. He helped keep the site alive for 2 days longer than it had any right to stay that way. That earns a better place than outside in open drift with active infected still moving through the low ground. I clear a spot in the radio room corner, behind the stripped shelves, where the wall is cold and the door can be secured. Then, I go back into the warm room, shut the barrier, and sit with the ledger in my lap until the lamp battery dips low enough to make the light pulse. After that, I work again. Sitting does nothing for the next intake icing, the next fuel clog, or the next group that may read our tracks the same way Stig read them. The next 2 days are repair and reduction. I use Freya's tool roll to strip the bad injector from the generator and swap in the spare. Yusuf had me move. I rebuild the fuel filter stack from the cleanest remaining elements and start hand-pumping old diesel through cloth and wire mesh into a settling can, so I do not waste what is left in the open drums. I seal the corridor north crack properly, with a plate over the maintenance panel, and drift packed from outside during a calm spell. I do not reopen the outer half of the block for use. I leave it as a sacrificial shell, with alarms on the hatch and the corridor door. The warm room gets smaller again. Mattress, heater, lamp, water, rations, tools, radio, rifle. Everything else goes to cold storage or hidden cache. Every object has to earn the space it takes. On the third evening after Stig leaves, the radio gives me the first clear signal since the helicopter abandoned the site. It is not rescue. It is not an organized sweep. It is a woman from a coastal depot reading out weather and route conditions in Greenlandic first and then rough Danish, with a note added after both passes that any occupied remote stations should mark themselves by daylight smoke only and avoid night signals. She repeats that twice, then asks for acknowledgements by brief call sign only. I do not answer at once. I think about what a night signal brought here last time. I think about how many other people may be listening from sites with weaker walls and worse fuel than mine. Then I key the set once on low power and give the old utility call sign from the binder on Dale's desk. No name, no head count, no request. A click comes back after 5 seconds and the woman says, "Heard." Then the channel moves on. That one word changes the shape of the days ahead without fixing any of the hard parts. It means I am on a list somewhere. It means there are other holdouts, depots, maybe one working chain of people keeping weather, routes, and warnings moving. It also means the old site is no longer as forgotten as it was. If one depot can hear me, another person can too. Lars and Freya may talk when they reach shelter. Stig may talk if he makes it to the Cove station on foot. Anyone hearing occupied utility site on the air may start measuring fuel against distance. I do not celebrate. I go outside at dawn, shovel over the most obvious camp scars, move the dead machine farther from the strip with the loader once I get it limping awake, and start planning a second living space deeper in the service block in case the outer warm room gets compromised next time. The site after all of that looks more dead than before, which is exactly how I want it. I collapse the prefab stovepipe, tear down the top windbreak, and drag the broken machine parts into the machine shed, where they cannot be read from the ridge. I black out the high slit except for one narrow observation gap I can close with a finger. I bury the empty jugs from Stig's group and move my spare can farther north under a marker only I know. I open the floor hatch 1 inch during a calm period, pour sand and stripped bolts into the gap, and close it again so anything moving below has one more layer to fight through. Then, I sit on the workbench with Freya's tool roll open beside me, and Yusuf's cardboard notes in my pocket and listen to the generator settle into its new rhythm. It is not a good place. It is not a secure place. It is one place I understand better now than I did before the tracks. Before Stig. before the shot in the dark and the bad trade and the dead room in the radio corner. I know which wall leaks first in a crosswind. I know how long the heater can coast on low before the water bottles start glazing over. I know where footsteps sound different when someone is walking with a tool instead of empty hands. I know one more group will come when roots open enough and rumor spreads far enough. I also know what this block can and cannot do for me. That is better than hope. Hope leaves gaps. This work leaves me a room, a fuel list, a set of reinforced doors, and one more night with heat inside steel, while the wind drags over the roof and the infected keep moving somewhere out in the dark, where the snow holds them up instead of putting them down. And that's where we'll stop for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me how the story hit you, what moments worked, what didn't, and what you'd want to hear next. And a big thank you to everyone supporting the channel. You keep this project alive. Until next time, Survivor. Jack's Nightmares, signing off.